Many governments assess so-called sin taxes on items such as alcohol and tobacco. Do these taxes represent good public policy? A recent panel discussion tackled that topic. The event was co-hosted by the John Locke Foundation, Western Carolina University's Center for the Study of Free Enterprise, and the Federalist Society. We're interviewing panelists to get their take on the topic. In this segment, we welcome Dr. Todd Nesbit, Assistant Professor of Economics at Ball State University and co-editor of a book on this very topic titled For Your Own Good: Taxes, Paternalism, and Fiscal Discrimination in the 21st Century. Welcome to the program.
I appreciate you having me on the show.
So first of all, your book tackles this exact topic, sin taxes, what they do, why they're in place, whether they represent good public policy. Tell us what the book is designed to do.
Yeah, so Adam Hoffer and I, we pulled together 25 academic scholars from around the nation who all have a lot of experience working in the tax space. And it's the book itself is geared toward really trying to explain, number one, why we end up seeing selective taxes as opposed to broader-based, more efficient, economically efficient taxes. And then secondly, really what are some of the secondary unintended consequences that result from these taxes. And then we obviously conclude with some general guidelines, some best practices for a lot of the states and local governments.
You use the term selective taxes, not quite the term sin taxes, but sin taxes would be among these selective taxes.
Yes, absolutely. So the most common selective tax would be, I think most people would see it as a sin tax, but even cell phone and data charges or taxes would fall under that, and haven't quite made it to the sin tax level. But I think that in the future, I think you'll probably see some arguments that in that regard with specifically the data plans that are out there.
In general, I get the sense that people who have studied these taxes and looked at them from the vantage point of good versus bad public policy say, this is probably not the right way to go.
No, selective taxes ultimately have led to really poor policy across the board. I've labeled it as lazy public policy in many respects. And so broad-based taxes are certainly much more efficient. Selective taxes, they tend to disadvantage certain parties. There's a lot of the burden of these taxes certainly fall on the poor. And then they ultimately advantage some corporations or some companies compared to some others. And so there's some cronyism involved in the application of these taxes. Politicians generally see them as more politically advantageous, mainly because if there's some need for raising revenue, whether it be due to an increase in expenditures or a decrease in intergovernmental grants from the federal level, there's that revenue need. But they could fund it either through broad-based, that apply increase in taxes on all their constituents, or you can selectively tax some small segment of your constituents. Only about 15% of the populations now smoke. That's an easy target at this point. And they can put a nice spin on it that says, oh, well, we're doing this to improve health as well.
We are chatting with Dr. Todd Nesbit, Assistant Professor of Economics at Ball State University, and as we mentioned, also co-editor of a book on this topic of selective taxes or sin taxes. It's called For Your Own Good: Taxes, Paternalism, and Fiscal Discrimination in the 21st Century. Some people are going to be listening to us and they're going to say, wait a minute, people who smoke, there's no reason why we shouldn't just put an extra tax on those cigarettes, or people who drink alcohol. They're choosing to do these things. They don't have to do these things. Why not just put some extra taxation on that? From the vantage point of someone looking at good tax policy, why is that not the right way to focus on this?
Yeah, so I think that typically when we've talked about sin taxes historically, it's been more of correcting for actions that have that an individual or a group of individuals take that tend to have some side cost on to other people unaffiliated with that action itself. These are, in the economics lingo, this would be an externality problem. And now we're starting to see with cigarettes, the argument used to be, secondhand smoke. So there was that external cost. Now the focus has become more on it's internality. So cost on myself, that if I happen to smoke, well, I'm causing damage to myself, reducing my own health, and I'm just not aware enough of it or knowledgeable enough to actually take the correct action. And I think that there's potentially some good argument to say, hey, maybe we should try to help fellow citizens be more healthy. But the bigger question is, should we do that through a stick? Punishing them for this consumption, or trying to more lead it with lead their decision making more with a carrot rather than that stick. And so try to have these educational campaigns, even have some type of program where we reward them for smoking cessation.
You work at Ball State University in the Midwest. Why come down to North Carolina and participate with a group and your peers in a presentation designed for North Carolinians? Is this a state that could definitely learn some lessons here?
Yeah, North Carolina is a really interesting case, I think, mainly because if you look at a lot of the business climate indices that exist out there, the Tax Foundation just recently put out the 2019 State Tax Business Climate Index. North Carolina ranks number 12. This is really quite good. Top to roughly 20% of the nation, but that's with the business climate. And if you look at in our book, we have a paternalism index that's state-based. North Carolina ranks 33rd. And so certainly there's a lot of room for improvement in the use of taxes, selective taxes. The state doesn't do too bad. They're roughly 21, 22 in that index, so certainly on the better half of the group. But they really tend to struggle with bans, so really that paternalist nature, so trying to discourage certain actions and doing so through public policy. And so a lot of individual freedoms are being really diminished, mainly through some of these tax policy and bans. A ban is essentially almost, you can interpret it as like an infinite selective tax. And so it falls into the same line of literature as well.
If people are interested in targeting these things like alcohol consumption or cigarette use, what's a good way to attack this policy-wise that doesn't involve the selective taxation that you see as such a problem?
Yeah, that's a difficult one, certainly. Because I think certainly we could try to rely on, as I think we used to some time ago, rely on a lot of nonprofits to pick up that role. However, if we want to do it through public policy, there's certainly going to need to be some form of tax revenue to fund various programs. And so it's really, I think, that based on some of our research that's presented in the book, I think it's more of, well, if we want to reduce cigarette smoking, tie or earmark the tax source that links directly with the need. So if there's more people smoking, there's a greater need potentially then for smoking cessation programs that needs more revenue. However, if we then tax cigarettes and earmark that directly for that expenditure, we see that more smoking leads to more revenue for cessation programs, and it's responding directly to the need.